So, my name is John English. I'm the senior historical correspondent for the Friends of Beaubears Island, the past director of that. Love the island, love the organization. And we're doing an interview with Wayne Curtis, a very noted author in the Miramichi area. 21 books, Wayne? 21 books. So we're going to find out what he has to tell us in regards to where he grew up, family or whatnot, and how he came to be an author, his education, any stories he has to tell us. So that's what we're going to do. So maybe we'll go in chronological order, just to give it to some organization. Maybe start with where you were born and that kind of thing. So.
But I was born on a farm up the Howard Road here, 4 miles.
Right.
And I grew up there as a kid, going to the one-room school. And I was a kid that I always had to have a project on the go. I went to grade 8 in that one-room school, and then I moved down here to Blackville School. And I was intimidated by the big school and the big crowd. And so I quit school in the fall of 1957 when I was in grade 9. 14 years old. And I walked out because the teacher was beating everybody with a stick,
They did that back there. Some of them were cruel.
Yeah, they were cruel. And I didn't know algebra, I didn't know math. I loved English and literature and that sort of thing. But when it come to the mathematics and that sort of thing, I had problems. And that's when I got. So he had beat the guys ahead of me, and bell rang, and I was saved by the bell. Recess. So that gave me a chance to gather my books and get the hell out of there. And I walked up the Howard Road to my home. My mother said, "What are you doing home?" And I said, "I quit school." She said, "You'll have to go to work in the woods and with your father,
Right.
So that's what I did that first winter. I worked there. I was only 14 and small for my age. And worked there. We cut pulpwood.
Was it on your own family's lot or family?
My father had a couple of 100 acres of woodland.
Oh, that's a big space.
Yeah, so we worked there, my father and I was cold all the time because I didn't have the right clothes. But what I was going to say before that, I was a kid that always had to have a project going.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a real small boy. My grandfather, he made me a little bucksaw with a wooden frame, a little axe. And I used to go down in the woods on the frozen swamp, firewood on Saturdays.
Right.
Little birch trees, saw them up and hand slid into the house.
Yeah.
And I went from that. I cut pulpwood to buy myself a taxidermy course from the Northwestern School of Taxidermy. I used to send away in the back of the comic books, and you'd see these things advertised in the back of comic books.
Yeah.
So I got this course. It came over the year, like one course at a time, one book at a time, and how to mount a bird, and a squirrel.
So did you have to get your own specimens to practice on? Or?
Yes. So they were hunters, with slingshots, and we got squirrels and birds, and I did that. And then I grew away from that, and then I was a 98-pound weakling, really. So I was being pushed around. So in the back of another comic book, I saw where there was this manly art of self-defense home course, planned conditioning program from New York.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, at $13, I cut pulp and bought that. So that came, and I worked out then with this program. It was a program put together by old boxers like Renee Papajolos, and I worked and got the boxing gloves, so I boxed. And then later I got myself through cutting pulpwood.
Hard work, boy.
Yeah, I got myself a BB gun, and then a shotgun, and then a rifle, and a fishing rod and a reel.
Fly fishing.
Fly fishing, and we took up fly fishing. It was right there. It was happening anyway, but we needed our own equipment. So I always had a little project going.
Yeah.
And that advanced when after I was home for a couple of years. I went to Ontario, and I worked the factories in the 60s, and I sent some money home for the folks. And
so your dad, he was a man of the woods and the water. He really was a farmer too.
Yes, he kept a store. He had a little general store on the high road there. It's gone now, they tore it down, but it was a good store.
Yeah.
And so he closed it down for a while. I used it as a gymnasium, and I also used it as a workshop for my taxidermy work and other things I did in there. And so anyway, when I left for Ontario in 1962, the old farm was running the same as it had been running for hundreds of years. All horses.
Same equipment, roughly.
Same old equipment.
Hard work, really hard work.
Yeah, hard work and horse machinery. Now, when I came back in 1969 and that back to the land movement that was going around.
How old were you then when you came back? 69?
I come back, I'll be 20. I came back in 69, so I think it was around 25 or 26. I had been there 7 years.
So factory work is soul destroying.
Well, yes, and I found on the assembly line. I worked for General Motors for 6.5 years, and I worked for Kimberly-Clark. And it was mind-numbing. It was a mind-numbing job because
so mundane, repetitive, it
just going out every once in a while. Somebody, after so many years of doing this same job over and over and over again, a lot of people were taking nervous breakdowns and having to be trucked away to a mental institution. So I saw this coming, so I said to my wife, I'm getting out of there. So I phoned to George Troy, who was running the unemployment office in Newcastle.
Right.
I said, if you can find me a job, I'll move back home. So one day he phoned and said that he had a job as a manager at Stedman's in Newcastle. Stedman's.
I remember that store.
The basement, the furniture department. So I went to work there. I moved home and bought a little farmhouse in Millerton, a house and barn. And I set up there to raise my little family of 3 boys and worked in Newcastle. And I went from the Stedman's over to Lonsbury's, where I worked for 23 years, selling furniture, and I ended up managing the place.
So did you have your own car to go into town or take the train?
Oh yes, I had a car.
Okay.
I had a new car when I was working for General Motors.
Right.
Anyway, I lived in Millerton, and there was a nice little community. There was a little church there, a one-room school, and there was a pasture beside the house, and I could see the railway tracks from the train going by, and I could see the river. Had everything I needed there in Millerton. And my boys were young, and we used to go back in the woods and cut our own Christmas tree, drag it out. And through the years, I restored that house Victorian style. And I was in the furniture business, so I bought all Victorian furniture. The parlor was full of furniture Victorian style, hurricane lamps. Now, it was at this time I was writing a little bit. I was dabbling in magazines, those wildlife magazines that has a big fish on the cover, a big buck deer.
Those kind of things.
So I was writing those and selling them. So I said to my wife, she was a Mandeville from Middleton. I said, if I'm ever going to write anything worth reading, I'm going to have to get an education.
Yeah.
So I went and got my GED course, which was a few evenings at school, and I wrote the papers and passed it. And then I talked to Tom Delavan, who was a guidance counselor, and he said, you go to St. Thomas and talk to them there. So I went over and I talked to Father Martin, Monsignor Martin.
He was there a long time.
He was there a long time, and Larry Batt was the register. And I laid my little diploma, GED diploma on the table, and they laughed. And I said, I want to get an education. And so Father Martin said, just so happens we have a program starting in the fall in Newcastle, Chatham, where we're going to send a professor over 1 night a week or 2 nights a week.
Okay.
And to try the people that, because St. Thomas originated from Chatham.
Yes, it did.
So that's
they
our
moved it there in
university.
62 or 3.
Yeah, so anyway, I started in the fall at English 100 for professor came over from Fredericton. We all started off with C minuses. And then we eventually, I went to night school 1-2 nights a week for 10 years.
10 years?
Yes, 10 years. One night a week I was working at the store, and on Monday night was my night to go to school and take my books, and studied mostly English, like the Romantics and Shakespeare. Spent a whole
So
year.
you like that? You like that stuff?
Well, I did it because it was an education for me, and I was learning to read good writers.
Right.
I learned to read good writers. I never read junk. Now, my little library, which I'm moving now in Fredericton from one apartment to the other, so I had eliminated a lot of my books. But I was looking at the other day, and I said, I'm going to hang on to Proust, Marcel Proust. I'm going to hang on to George Eliot. I'm going to hang on to Leo Tolstoy.
The great ones.
The great ones. That's who I read, through the years. I've always read good literature, and I thought that it would be a good influence for my own writing. So anyway, I went to night school, and I'm writing a few essays, and then I decided to write a book on the Miramichi. It's called Currents in the Stream.
That was a great book.
That was a good book. It came out
I read
in
that
the
one.
summer of '88, I think it was. And after a week, it sold 2,000 copies. So,
That's impressive for a local book.
yeah, they printed again, and it sold 2,000 more. And I remember getting a call from Lillian Brennan, who was running the Irving down here. And she said, "Do you have any of those little books left?" They were selling for $10. And I said, "How many do you want?" She said, "I'll take all you can bring me." Because John Brophy was in it, and all these people were in it from here,
Yeah, yes.
My grandfather was in it, and great-grandmother, and my great-aunt, who was an actress in Boston. And so, anyway, I had a book signing there at the Irving in Blackville. And she sold them like hotcakes, and all of a sudden they wrote a print again, and I get another printing, and they sold 6,000 or 8,000 altogether over the next 10 years, next 5 years.
I did, but
Yeah.
I remember reading it.
Yeah, so that was my first book, and then it was a book about places on the river and quality famous people that came from these places, like Chatham, Snowball,
Yeah.
Gibson,
Yeah.
and those kind of things. So there was 3 short stories in the back, one about fishing, one about hunting, one about woods work. And so I went from that then to my first novel, One Indian Summer, which was an account of the deterioration of the family farm as I had seen it happen. An old man and his wife and 2 kids, they were running the farm, and as it went along, things tried to fall into place, and
And it's
eventually,
expensive to keep a farm up.
oh, it was, yeah, and the old man got old, he died, and so they ended up selling their property and moving away to the city. But it was a good look at the family farm, the way it was running when I was a kid. How they got together, the people of the community got together to thrash the oats, or to do the haying, or to kill the pig, or whatever it was.
Well, they had to support each other because all they had was each other.
They had each other, and there'd be a big meal at these farmhouses. My mother would cook for the crew with a thrashing day.
Yeah.
And so it was a good look at, and I'm proud of that book, One Indian Summer, because it's a look at the way and not only here, but across Canada. You're driving across Canada, you'll look, at little communities along the way that has a boarded up store like my father's.
Right.
And things have moved on from there, and the country sort of became a place for cottages. And so that's what happened at my old farm. When my father died, he willed me a few acres, 40 acres of woods, and a couple of acres on the river where him and I built a cabin in the fall of '74. It's a good log cabin with a fireplace, and I spent a lot of time there in the summer. So anyway, that was, so when I came home in '69, my father was no longer farming. As a matter of fact, he was driving a nice Oldsmobile. He was driving a nice Oldsmobile, and he was watching a colored television. So what happened? Social programs came in the '60s.
Mm-hmm.
There was a great urbanization of the rural communities
Yeah, there
in the
was.
'60s.
Yeah.
when I was, when I went to high school, there was no buses. So, kids had to come here to Blackville and pay room and board, if they wanted to go to high school.
They were same in Newcastle.
Yes, so the buses came, and social programs came in the 60s, like we got our own flag, we got Medicare, because no longer did we have to sell a cow to pay for the doctor bills. And Medicare came, and old age security, and Canada pension came. So,
yeah.
And also what it came around that time was the big malls. And you could go into a mall in Newcastle, or Chatham, or Fredericton area, and you could buy a bag of potatoes for less money than you could raise it, because you had to buy fertilizer or keep the horse walking, and you had to plant all these things, and it took a day for this and a day for that, and you wait all summer. So the prices were low in the supermarkets, so people just got their Canada pension, they got old age pension, whatever it was. They went to town, bought their groceries, and the fields were let grow fallow. They grew up into brush and trees, and my father's farm now is full of big trees, and the farm adjacent to ours, which Papa owned, my grandfather owned years ago. So, so the country grew up in the woods, and it became a cottage country. Like I have my cottage on the river, and it's on the other side of the river. There's all cottages, and the farm above our place, the Hennessy Place, cottages. And
one of your books, you mentioned that it was not uncommon for a family or a farm needed to be sold for back taxes or something like that.
Sometimes that went on. They sold these farms for fishing rights.
Right.
And a lot of them went for little or nothing, because the old people, a few $100s was a lot of money, so they took it, and the farm, river property, any kind of fishing at all on it, the river frontage, it was bought up by the Americans. And so
outsiders, in our view, in our eyes.
The outsiders, and they took over the river, and but we kept our property, we kept our frontage, and my father willed each of us a piece, a couple of acres. And so that's where we have our cabins. I have a cabin there. My sister has a cabin. My brother Gary, Winston, and Herbie, and my son Steve, my son Jason. We all have cabins along that stretch of river frontage, which is 180 rods of frontage. So we go there, and like in the 70s now, we did a lot of partying there. We would go to our camps, and we all drank too much in the 70s, and we partied together, and we fished. And we'd spend the weekends there.
Was there music?
Music, we played music, I played fiddle. That's another thing I didn't mention in the things that I was working to buy when I was a kid. I sent to Pete Music Company for a fiddle and bow, cut pulp and paid for it. And I practiced, and I got to be a damn good fiddler. And I played for dances here in Blackville. On Saturday nights we had a dance in the public hall here in Blackville.
I've heard about those dances.
Yes, and then
very popular.
I played at all kinds of house parties and weddings, and $2 a night I charged, and some of them were pretty rough dances up the hard road there, But anyway,
yes.
So we did that for make money, and there was also a chance to get out. And
how did you teach yourself?
I taught myself. Well, I had an uncle who was a fiddler,
okay.
not a great fiddler, but so he showed me how to hold a bow, and then later I took lessons. And I graduated from the old-time fiddle music like Don Messer used to play. I graduated from that to gypsy kind of music, and then to jazz. And then I took music lessons and played classical. But I only played classical music for a while. And then I went to Cuba for a year, and I left the violin home. And because when I came back, I found that, well, nobody could play with me. If you're playing by note, you're playing from Bach.
They couldn't keep up with you then.
Well, they wouldn't know the piece for one thing.
Well,
my brother played piano by ear.
The story we can't hear you.
Yeah. So I remember my brother Gary and I playing for the opening Membership Folk Song Festival about 7 or 8 years ago, and I played a tune. I practiced a long well set so I could play it. And I took the violin home and I stood it in the corner. I never picked it up again. It's there for sale if anyone wants to buy it. I still have the old one I bought at Peak Music in 1956, but I wouldn't sell that. Money wouldn't buy that.
No.
Came to a head.
So if I remember correctly, your dad was part of he was in the folk song festival, or
no?
No.
My father was a country singer when he was a young fellow, hanging around Blackville here in the days of the singing cowboys in the 30s, and back then, you know,
times were hard back then.
Times were hard. The men dressed in cowboy suits. You know, the singing cowboy was a big thing. Wolf Carter, Hankston, all those guys. And they hung around down in Blackville here under a big tree there on the corner of Bridge Street and Main Street. There was a big California maple there where people used to gather. And they were singing and yodeling. That was, you know, I don't know, Jimmy Rogers.
Yeah.
Jimmy Rogers, Wolf Carter. And that's when my mother met my father. And my mother was a Cockland from down the Rapids. And they were married on Christmas Eve, 1938. They went down to Newcastle on the express, got married at St. Andrew's Anglican, and they come up on the Hooper that same day.
The train, yeah.
The train, yeah. So the Hooper took them up the siding up home there at Keenan. There was a siding there. So they were married that year, and Winston, my older brother, he was named after Winston Churchill during the war, you know. He was born in 41. And I was born in 43 on February the 9th. I have a birthday coming up soon. I'll be 80. And as a matter of fact, my friend David Adams Richards is having a birthday party for me in Fredericton. My 80th birthday. So anyway, so I don't know where I was now, but...
Well, we were talking about you had a cottage and you had land given to you by your father. And so be in the 70s?
The 70s. I built in 74, and I got partied through the 70s. And we all drank too much. I wrote a story about it. It's called On Top of the World. It'll be in my book that's coming out next summer. Its title is Sons of the Fishermen. That book will be around next summer, in my 22nd book. So now I'm working on a second book of Christmas stories. Those Christmas stories sell like hotcakes. You know?
They're very popular.
Yeah, they are popular. I did one 3 or 4 years ago, and maybe 6 years ago. And everybody, you know, wanted the book, and it sold out. And I ended up on the national newscast down in regional national in Halifax, talking about this book, and it was already sold out. So anyway, but yeah, so I have another book in me, I think. I'm working on it, but I find now, John, that if I sit down and write for a couple of hours, I'm exhausted.
Well, it is mentally exhausting to do it right.
Exhausting, yes. And one time I could write all day, but now I sit down and I read the great writers.
Right.
And I sit down, and I think it's a good influence to read good writers. Because their meter, you know, you get used to reading their meter.
Gives you the style that's
Styles, yeah.
That's a really good style.
Yeah. So I write for a couple of hours. After I have a couple of days off, I can write for a couple of hours. Most mornings I write for an hour.
So do you know what it is in you that makes you want to write?
Well, it's getting back to where I started.
Yeah.
It's that old creative energy I had when I was a kid. Like I wanted to cut those trees. I wanted to play violin. I wanted to do taxidermy. I wanted to be a boxer.
You wanted projects.
I had a project going all the time. And when I was in Ontario, I took golf lessons, took up golf. And I ended up being an assistant at the pro shop. And I was, you know, I could teach, but I didn't teach. But I played golf all the time I was in Ontario. Now, when I came back in '69, I joined the local club down in Newcastle. But I found that the river took me away from the golf course. We had built a cabin upriver, And I was in Millerton, so what do? Do you go golfing, or do you go?
That's a hard choice, isn't it?
Yeah, so I went up to the camp and we partied there and fished.
Right.
And we fished, and when we were kids we fished, and we'd get enough fish in that fly line to fill a barrel in the fall of the year. Like,
and you would salt them, you would smoke
salt them for the winter. And I have one fishing rod that caught 500 salmon. This is way back, you know, when the river was full of fish.
them. And good size salmon, probably.
Well, then in the 70s, when the ban came on the net fishing in the estuary,
yeah.
1972, it was brought in there by Romeo, the
Wow.
yeah, fisheries minister.
Yes.
And so we quit killing fish. We got together in this group. There was a few Americans that used to come and spend the summer at our place up there, all the camps around.
Mm-hmm.
We got together and said, we're not going to kill any more fish.
Hook and release.
Hook and release. We were way ahead of the government on that. So we fished and let them go. And because you could buy a piece of fish, you know, for $5.
Right.
And why would you kill a salmon?
Right.
Because we could see what they were.
They were declining a bit in numbers and probably size by then.
And I've been writing for the Atlantic Salmon Journal. I belong to the Atlantic Salmon Federation. I've been writing for that magazine for 60 years. And I have a story in this current day issue that's just come out yesterday. I got my copy yesterday. But anyway, yeah, we let fish go, and we preached conservation. I got 3 conservation awards, like Atlantic Salmon Federation, the Miramichi Salmon Association, and so that, and I was starting to sell my stories. Now my literature is, a lot of people say that it's non-fiction, and I don't care what they say, it's fiction, but it reads like non-fiction. And people will say, that happened to you, that happened to me. You, and I say, no, that's fiction, you know.
The thing is, they're so well written. Your sentence structure is so expressive. Your words are so expressive that
Well,
it's a joy to read.
Well, it's hard work to do that. I mean, I might spend a whole morning on a paragraph, you know, to get the words in the right
To make
place.
it as right in
Yes.
your mind.
Right in your mind, and then if you read other people's writing, it helps. You know, the meter, Marcel Proust has long sentences, Hemingway had short sentences. You know, that full of loaded with description and things. But anyway, yeah. So we quit killing fish, and
Like you say, you were yards and miles ahead of the conservation movement.
we were, and I got some awards for that, and then I started winning some awards for my writing. You know, I had, after going to night school for 10 years and having mostly A's. I was looking at my transcript the other day. The first couple of them were, because I didn't have any high school. First couple were C's, C minus, C plus.
Yeah.
But the last 7 or 8 were A's. So the courses got very expensive and the books got expensive. So I thought, you know, I'm going to read what I want to read now and write my own stuff. No more essays for the pros, for the professors. So I started writing, and so then in 2004, haven't seen me struggle the way I did for all those years to get an education. St. Thomas University gave me an honorary degree, which was so nice. I wear their ring with pride. And so that was a nice boost for my morale. And there was a big...
well, they don't give those every day to anybody, and they really have...
yeah.
You have to be exceptional, whatever your field is,
Yeah, there were...
to be even considerate.
The president of St. Thomas, who was Dan O'Brien at the time, and you know, he called me one morning and said, "Wayne, we're going to give you this degree in the spring." So I thought, that's great, you know. But then I went on and I got other awards, like the Lieutenant Governor's Award for Excellence in Literary Arts, which came with $20,000.
Bingo.
Yeah, I got that a few years ago. And I won the CBC Drama Award. I wrote a script to a play, a stage movie that was aired on CBC. So then there was other awards I got, like the David Richards Award for short fiction, the Woodcock Award, CBC Drama Award. I kind of forget them now.
So your main income was writing at the time, in the 70s?
I was writing in the 80s.
The 80s, sorry.
Now,